Our last and final step relates to exporting this project and really preparing it for either a SCORM or CMI5 import or perhaps XAPI, perhaps the learner's performance gets reported to a learner record store. We have some options and we'll discuss those briefly. I made some tweaks between the steps. I went into my tools and design styles, and I applied the material design style to this project. So if I preview in the browser, I'll just review some of the changes that I made. I tightened things up a little bit. I tweaked alignments. I made minor changes. But the biggest visual change you'll see relates to choosing the material design. So that kind of gives me a header and footer with a specific look. I added some instructions, and you should too, just now that you understand how the interface and how the challenge works, just provide some instructions to the learner. And then, I made some tweaks here, but everything is minor. If I return back to the first page, you'll notice this start button. To make that interactive, I can select the image. And then this is not an SVG image. It could be. It's just a basic JPEG. So what I'm going to do is put a hotspot, superimpose a hotspot on the JPEG. So I chose interact, and then I'll just choose hotspot, which immediately puts a hotspot onto the screen. I'll just drag that over. And now I would treat this like I would, an SVG element. I'll right click. So choose branch options when selected. So when this hotspot is selected. And here what I want to do is jump to a page. I could simply go to next page. That could be the branch option. Or just in case I add pages, let's go immediately to the instructions. So I'm just jumping to a specific page. I'll save that. Click OK. And later we'll see how that works. A way of testing this, because we have 24 items, and it might be a little tedious to go through all 24 items just to see how this behaves when we've reached the end of our queue. So what we can do is back in instructions. Remember, we had a loop in here. We looped 24 times. Well, I've replaced that with 3. So this read 24. I simply now later I can restore that back to 24, but just to see how this works, I'll add 3 items. Save and close that. So I'll go ahead and preview this in the browser. And we'll loop through 3 items and then see what happens as a result. Now what I'll do is I'll answer 2 correctly and 1 incorrectly. so that now our start button works. There we go. So expert and subject consider that mass practice and retrieval is better than spacing. Well, that's a false statement, but I'm going to answer true. Sorry, this statement is not true. Continue. So that'll be added to the queue. And remember, so the first time it was an expert that was shown. Now let's answer these correctly. Address prior knowledge, submit that. Well done. I'll answer this one. Add problems with complexity. Well, it's an expert. That would be true. Continue. And here, okay, consider that mass practice and retrieval is better than spacing out practice. So in this case, it came up with the same persona as we had originally. But I'll go ahead and answer that. That's false. Submit that. Now when we continue, we've reached the end of the queue. And it'll display that. Congrats, you've completed the challenge. Let's go on to the report page. So we had 4 items, but we lost a point. So on our very first item, we lost a point. And then we eventually, so you can see here, it's not just, 2 out of 3, because we had 4 statements that were shown and we answered 1 incorrectly, so we lost a point. It isn't that we got 0, it's that we actually had a -1. Now notice the rest. So we're not hooked up to a learning management system, but if we were, these scores would be reported to that system. Now how do you do that? Well, that comes through export. So our final step is exporting. We'll click on export. We have a variety of choices. One of the most common choices is SCORM 1.3. This is an older version of SCORM. This is simply zipping up the project in case you want to move it somewhere. We have, this isn't really relevant to your case. We can simply treat this as an XAPI project, which means that score would have been reported to a learner records store. So remember the initials XAPI. We have some other, we'll not worry about these other choices, but here, this is an important one. CMI5, very few learning management systems support this, but this is really, I think this is my favorite standard because this combines SCORM-like reporting together with the flexibility of XAPI. XAPI is Experience API, which means that you can essentially record any experience. For example, if I wanted to record all of the items that the learner missed, I could do that through XAPI. It gives me a very flexible standard. Okay, well, I'll choose SCORM 1.3. I'll put in a module name. Click on export. And once it's done, it says you can find your exported project in the exports, the Lodestar exports folder. This is a zip file, but it's a very special zip file. It contains all the ingredients, the IMS manifest, and basically all the hooks to a SCORM player. So learning management systems have built in a SCORM player. This will report to that player so that eventually this ends up in the score will end up in a grade book or wherever. Now that's all we needed to do for SCORM. If you did want to use XAPI, I'll show that briefly. So if we go to our next page here, if we go to the interface and I jump in, with our continue button, essentially our continue button is doing the reporting. So when we're all done, when we've hit the end of the queue, the continue button will generate a user score and a total score, but we can add in there an XAPI statement. So let's take a look at that. So here is where we set the custom user score. So all along we've been tracking the user score in a global variable called user score, and we've also been tracking the total number of items in the queue. But then we need to send that to our underlying reporting system, the Lodestar reporting system, so that it can report all of this through SCORM. So therefore we have to use this function, set custom user score. And that will set the user score and then the total score so that our report page works correctly. But we can also add in this statement. So the original code did not include this, but this just to give you an idea of how XAPI would work. This statement, what we're doing is sending to a learner records store the fact that this learner has experienced completion. And then this is an activity name just in case you want to later report on specific activities. That's what this is doing. This is an activity name. All of this is documented in our help. So if I typed in send, there we go, send X API statement. So there's a version without the activity name and a version with the activity name. So the activity name, sometimes, for example, you might want to filter out everything related to an activity, for example, for a leaderboard. So that's why that comes into, this is really handy for data reporting purposes or for leaderboards. But essentially this gives you, it tells you what you need to know. It sends the XAPI statement to a learner record store where the verb, so the verb will be experienced and the object in this case is completed. And then we have the activity name, which we've talked about. So those are the only, so essentially I could sprinkle these send to X API statements throughout my code to capture the user experience. But one caveat for all of that, and that is you won't really see this work unless you export. So you need to choose export and you need to choose the XAPI. So the tin can XAPI, or you can combine SCORM and XAPI by choosing this SCORM. So this gives you all of the SCORM reporting capabilities, plus it'll send statements to a learner record store. So that's how you would accomplish that. You have to do this to see this work. You have to do this at least once. You have to export. Even if you preview and you want to see your learner record store statements, you have to do this once. You have to export it at least once so it puts in the appropriate wrappers. One last thing related to that. So the way you configure a learner record store. So what learner record store do you want to send the statements to? So here's where you need to find out from the learner record store what its endpoint is, and then you're going to establish a key and a secret, and that will cause the statement to be sent to the appropriate learner record store. So that concludes our project. In our project, we added graphics, and then we built an interface and provided at least 10 elements of this interface with IDs so that we could target them with our script. We created a data set, we created an image bank, and then finally we exported this as a SCORM object. We also showed how we could have added XAPI statements in order to send the performance to a learner record store. So these are essentially all of the ingredients. With these ingredients, you could build just about anything that you can imagine. And that was the whole point of this exercise, freedom to design. So thanks so much for hanging in there. Until next time.